It's still holding in my hand the envelope. My coffee is now a cold cup sitting on the counter. And down the hallway, my daughter is laughing at a meme on her phone, that deep, readily available laugh she's had since she was 4 years old, while I zoom in to read one line of text in my own kitchen and deactivate the life I thought I was living. Probability of relationship, 0%. 0. Not inconclusive, not further testing recommended, 0%. The number you can only get when there is nothing at all. The woman that raises a child and the child raised and not have an ounce of blood in common. I read it again and again. The same way you read a word so many times, it stops looking like a word. I rationalized that the lab had read it wrong. Labs make mistakes. I did one cheek from with a swab. Oh no, I told myself. I mixed up the envelopes in which my samples went. In roughly 4 seconds, I told myself 100 things, and none of them were true, except for one voice buried underneath all of it. A quieter voice, the voice of someone older. You already knew. You've known for years. You simply never allow yourself to let it touch your palm. I was her own for 18 years. I was in the delivery room when she was born. I counted her fingers. I was the one who woke up at 3 a.m., who watched YouTube videos on how to braid hair, who sat in her car in a hospital parking lot crying when they removed her tonsils because I couldn't be there. That's 18 years worth of birthday cakes and shredded knees and one truly terrible middle school haircut. 18 years of mine. And a scrap of paper from some other state laboratory had just informed me that none of it began the way I was told it began. Stick with me if you have ever clutched a truth that you could not put down and could not outlive. Because the 0% wasn't what hurt most. The 0% was the door. What I uncovered took me into a hospital records room, onto a stranger's front porch 3 states away, and to a girl with my husband's identical eyes who had been calling another woman Mom for 18 years. And the one person in my own family who, as I would eventually discover, had known all along and said nothing. My name doesn't matter, but the reason I say this on the other side of it, with steady hands, is that if you happen to be sitting where I was sitting that morning, you need to know what did not destroy me. The truth. The lie does. The truth is what finally allows you to take a deep breath. Let me work back to the beginning. Not the first start I thought for 18 years. The real one. I want you to know how normal this was. Because that's the part no one ever believes, that this kind of secret might have lived for nearly 2 decades in a totally average kitchen, an ordinary marriage, an unremarkable Tuesday, and never once tipped over anything off the shelf. We were the family that other families of the neighborhood measured against. I hate saying that now, but true. It was 22 years since Mark and I had been married. He even coached the rec league soccer team the year our daughter quit it. For 3 years, I did the school fundraiser, each time swearing it was the last. That we were the house with the porch light never turned off, where neighborhood kids ended up on summer nights because we had the good snacks and didn't ask too many questions. And we had Emma. I need to introduce you to Emma, because if you don't love her the way I do, none of what follows will hit the way it needs to. Emma is 18. She laughs before the joke is over, as if she knows life will be funny and just can't wait. She is the type of kid who will text the new girl at school so that she doesn't have to eat lunch in an empty cafeteria. She aspires to be a nurse and has since she was 9, when she determined that all of her stuffed animals suffered from treatable afflictions. She leaves cabinet doors open. She can't parallel park to save her life. When she is tired, she calls me Mama, and when she wants something from me, Mom, and when I annoy her, my full first name, dragged out into 4 syllables. In every way I know how to define it, she is mine. But that's the thing nobody ever tells you. You no longer see a child as a face when you raise one. You see them as a feeling. Frankly, I could not have said whether Emma looked like me. You did not stare at your son like that. You stare at them like you would your own hand. They just are there. They are yours. You do not audit this. Other people audited it, though. I just didn't listen. This all began small, like the best of these things. One comment here, one comment there, the kind you smile at and no longer think about. Those eyes must run in Mark's side. Sure. Isn't it funny how children always resemble the mailman? And a laugh, and everyone laughs, and you laugh too because what the hell else are you going to do? My own mother years ago holding Emma as a baby and going silent for a second too long before saying, both of you are very much not her type, and then handing it back to her, making sure not to leave any trace of the conversation behind, and never, ever discussing it again. So you should be honest about this. The people that watch this will have lived it and know. I noticed. I always noticed. You hear a noise in the house at night and you listen for it, and then decide that nothing could have made that sound. For the next 18 years, over and over again, I decided not to leave my bed. So what finally made me? It wasn't dramatic. And that's the part that haunts me. Not a confession of love or a scuffle or letter accidentally discovered in a drawer. It was a school project. When Emma came home the spring she started her senior year at school and was given an assignment for her anatomy class, genetics. They were learning about genetics, and our teacher had them dow with those Punnett square graphs, where you map out eye color and hair and whether or not you can roll your tongue. Harmless. Kind of homework I had done myself 30 years earlier. Sitting at the kitchen table, she was getting angry as she rubbed hard enough to rip the paper. "It's not happening," she said. "The squares do not add up to my eyes." I looked over her shoulder. Mark has brown eyes. I have brown eyes. And Emma has these pale, pure, almost gray-green eyes that everybody always says are striking in their size. The eyes strangers talk to her about at grocery store checkout lines, I said, on autopilot, the way you do. 2 brown-eyed parents can have a kid with light eyes. It just means we have the recessive gene trait in both of us. I don't know how much weightage the competitions would hold, but I wrote that, she said. But it's like Mr. Howell said, you rarely see it that light. He said you would tend to see it somewhere in the family during 2004. Do you have anyone with my color of eyes? I opened my mouth to say, of course we do, and then I couldn't think of one. Not my parents. Those are not my grandparents in the pictures. Not Mark's giant, boisterous family, brown-eyed family. No one in 18 years' worth of family reunions and Christmas cards. I placed my hand on my daughter's shoulder and, for the first time, stood in our kitchen with fists clenched around an icy question I had spent 18 years avoiding. I said, "Probably someone from somewhere, right? Genetics are weird, baby." She said, "Yeah, that would be," and then went back to her homework. I walked upstairs and sat at the end of my bed for a long time. I didn't sleep that night. Next to Mark, with the healthy snore of a guy who had absolutely nothing gnawing at him, I lay there and did that thing you do when you're trying to talk yourself out of a feeling. The case of everything is okay. I created it. I had carried Emma. I had been there. I'd felt her kick. The ultrasound pictures I kept in a box in the closet. In her baby book, there were hospital bracelets my name prints on. That idea shaping in the dark is crazy. That's paranoid shit. It's the kind of thing that wrecks a good life because a lady couldn't let one little noise in the night go. But by about 3 a.m., I had observed something about my case. Every slice of evidence I had that Emma was biologically mine also meant, in turn, that I had been pregnant, that I had given birth. None of it was evidence about the particular infant who arrived home. I had carried a baby. I knew that for certain. I realized that I had not a single scrap of evidence the baby in the next room was that baby. That was the thought that lifted me out of bed. And here I must explain what I did, and I'm sorry that it's so secretive, but, well, if you were me, you'd understand. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't tell my mother. Even my best friend, the one I tell everything to, did not hear a word of it from me. The minute it left my lips, it became real, and I needed it to stay inside the cloak of crazy for just a tad longer. I had to be the only one who knew that I was even asking the question, so that when the answer returned and it was fine, which I felt certain it would, I could fold up this whole embarrassing episode and tuck it away in my mind somewhere deep, and never tell a soul I doubted my own child. I had ordered a test on Tuesday, on my phone, in the bathroom, with the fan running like a teenage boy. One of those mailed-at-home kits. You swab 2 cheeks, mail it back, wait. I opted for the expedited/fast lane results, as I already knew that waiting was going to age me years. It was not ordering it that was the hardest. The most difficult part was without Emma knowing that I had taken a sample of her. The not being able to just ask is a grief of its own kind, which I am going to tell you how I did it. I waited for her to fall asleep. My 18-year-old, who used to let me peek in on her every night, now sleeps with a door ajar and her phone turned over face down and 100% of the privacy that teenagers have access to. I stood outside her bedroom at midnight with an applicator stick on a tube like a common house robber. I couldn't do it that way. There was no way I would shed a part of myself without my child knowing. I swallowed again and made it to her bedside. But when I turned away and went back to bed and cried in the bathroom with the fan on, again. Finally, I took the most normal of behaviors in the world. The following morning, I cooked her favorite breakfast and we drank from the same smoothie, 2 straws, as we've done since she was a toddler. Then, when she went in for a shower, I pulled her straw out of the cup. That was it. That was the big spy thing. A pink, reusable straw shoved into a sandwich bag, which I drove 40 minutes to another town to mail. Needed that straw away from my local post office, as if anyone there had known, as if it mattered. I just wanted it out of my life. Then I waited. If you have ever been in a situation where the result may end your world, time stops being normal. The laboratory claimed 5 to 7 working days. I spent 9 years there. I went to work. I made dinner. I laughed at Mark's jokes. I sat there and clapped at a soccer banquet. And all the time below that, there was a second me going over math at red lights and practicing 2 completely different futures and refreshing an email I'd muted so it wouldn't ping in front of my family. I would find myself gazing at Emma across the dinner table, looking into her face as if she were someone else's had ever come close to anything like this, and then hating myself for that and doing it again. On the 6th day, nothing. Day 7, nothing, where I nearly convinced myself that the test had been lost in transit and that this was the universe telling me to move on. As I stood at the kitchen counter on that 8th day, the email came in, as Emma sat down the hall laughing at her phone and my cup of coffee getting cold. And here is where I began this story. Probability of relationship? 0%. But before I let you know what I'd done next, and I did a lot, some of which I'd do again, some of it I never should have. Here is my question to you. Share where you're watching from, just your city, your country. I read them. And here, if you're willing, how many years have you known something in your gut and chose not to look? I'm not asking to be cruel. I'm taking a survey because I was the world's most loving coward for 18 years, and the first thing that helped me was learning how many of us there are. Drop it below, then stay with me, because 0% told me Emma was not my biological daughter. However, it did not tell me the location of my real daughter. The answer to that was stored in a hospital records room I would spend the next 3 weeks trying to gain access to. And what I finally found in that drawer is the bit of this story I've never been able to tell without choking up. We'll get there. I assure you, it will all come together. I wish I could tell you that when I read that number, I made a plan, that I was calm, that some stable, competent version of me was in place. In fact, I wrapped up Emma's lunch making. I want you to sit with how odd that is, because I have thought about it more than most anything else. My life in a world had just splintered, and my body, running on 18 years of memory muscles, was still spreading butter on the bread. Turkey, little mustard, no crusts, although she's 18 and hasn't asked me to cut the crusts off her sandwiches since 4th grade. I cut the crusts off. I shoved in the granola bar she likes and the apple she never eats, hauling back home banged up, and zipped the bag shut hard enough for her to feel when it gets tossed into the car. Then I called down the hall 5 minutes later, shouting, and a tone like concrete. I have no idea who that voice was coming from. I have never thanked anything more than I thanked whatever part of me kept that voice soft on that morning. She came down one shoe on, hopping, the other shoe in her hand, complaining about some quiz she hadn't studied for. And she took her lunch off the counter and kissed me on the cheek. Fast, automatic, teenagery, halfway out the door kiss. "I love you, bye," and vanished. I stood in the kitchen for a bit. Then I drove her to school. That is what we did, our doing, 3 mornings a week when her first class started late enough. She was in the passenger seat, her knees up on the dash, which I always told her not to do, scrolling through her phone and playing me a video I didn't watch. And I drove and said, in all the right places. But all this time, there was some sentence running around like a siren in my head, like it was trying to tell everyone something. She is not mine. She is not mine. It says on the test that she is not mine. I pulled up to the curb. She grabbed her bag. And before she exited, she pulled over, stopped in her tracks, looked over at me and said, "Are you okay? You're being weird." At 18, you could know me even better than my husband does. "I'm fine, baby," I said. "Didn't sleep great. Go, you'll be late." And she gave me the kind of look that said, "You don't know what you are talking about." Before the bell or the time or just my friend, waving, "Jimmy it I go," and off she went. As we made our way up the path and into the school, I watched her shuffle in, backpack on one side, hair doing its spring thing, and thought, whatever this is, whatever I find, I'm not losing that. A piece of paper could say whatever it wants. I do not care. That is my child. I want to be transparent that I did not experience this conviction all the way through. In the weeks to come, there were days it faltered, where I felt so knocked flat by the grief of it. The really stupid thing was that I went to bed with a promise of all the things I'd thought I wanted from her. But on that first morning after, watching her walk away, I already knew everything I needed to know about what would get me back through the rest of it. The 0% may extract a lot from me. It could not take her. Here's what I did next, and this is the part that tells you just how much I wanted to not believe this was true. I ordered a second test, a different company this time, a more forensic one, the kind that does legal paternity work. The sort of result that would stand up in court, with its chain of custody forms and its witness collection. I justified it as due diligence. To think the first kit, the inexpensive one, the one I'd endowed with a pink reusable straw, might have been tainted. Cross-contamination is real. Labs do make mistakes. You hold on to that the same way you cling to a railing. But I knew. The bargaining was beneath it all. As you know, the second test will be a repeat of the first. I ordered it anyway, because hope is not rational, and I wanted to be able to say that I left no stone unturned before allowing the truth all the way in. And then I waited on the second one, where I did something even worse. I started watching my husband. Mark and I have been married for 22 years. I know the sound of keys in door and my husband. I know where he sleeps on the bed, and that he hums when he's making coffee without him even realizing it. That he can't watch a movie without falling asleep in the last 20 minutes and proclaiming he watched it all. I know this man. And for a week or so, I stared at him like he was an unfamiliar person. And now had come the question you could not unask. Did he know? That happened to me, or just something I had been involved with without being aware. If he had an affair 18 years ago, his, mine, I even doubted that my memory was reliable. That's a special kind of insanity, too. Was there an arrangement? A secret? Some reason someone pulled up with a baby that wasn't ours? At dinner, I would watch him laugh and joke, oblivious to his surroundings, ask Emma how her quiz had gone and think, "You have no idea what has happened," or, "You are the very best liar I know," and I couldn't tell which. The thing about a betrayal you can't find is that it taints the non-accomplices with the same brush. They do not know whom to trust, and worse, that no one knows who has betrayed. But I lay next to a man that I love and thought, do I even know him at all? For a week, and he had done nothing wrong, and I couldn't tell him why. When his hand brushed over my shoulder, it made me wince. Let me set your mind at ease now, because I would hate for you laboring under this suspicion the entire course of my story, the way I labored with it as those weeks wore on. Mark didn't know. Mark was just as naive as me. The truth about him, when it came out, as it did eventually, broke him in the same way that it broke me, and we sat on the bathroom floor at 2 o'clock in the morning like survivors of a plane crash, comforting each other. But I didn't know that yet. That first week in Act 2, I was alone with it, and so made my own husband a suspect, which I'm not proud of. Although I think if you'd been there, you'd have done the same thing. Not telling was the heaviest burden I have ever borne. I want to speak about that directly because I suspect many of you are currently carrying something you haven't spoken aloud, and I want you to know the price it extracts. Such a secret doesn't stay still. It doesn't sit quietly in the bottom drawer until you're ready. It leaks. It got into everything. I'd be in a meeting at work and lose track of whose turn it was to speak halfway through someone's sentence. I would spontaneously cry in the car, at a red light, in the grocery store parking lot, once at the drive-thru with a teenager handing me my food bag and asking if I was okay. I told him I had allergies. In April. He nodded as if he was convinced. A mercy of sorts, that when you are drowning, people let you lie. And the worst of all was Emma herself. Why the one face that I wanted to hold the most now could not dare look at without beeping an alarm. She'd plop down next to me on the couch and rest her head on my shoulder like she did when she was little. This beautiful girl that would leave my heart hollow-clanged by the pure magnitude of what I had lost, stuffing it full of truth so horrible I'd be shocked if she could get up from even reading this. She thought I was her mother. What she did not know was that there was a question. And why, in turn, I was going to have to make my decision about the truth to her, which was as much hers as it is mine. Maybe more hers. I didn't sleep. One night, about 2 in the morning, I went down into that closet and pulled out the box. Every mother has the box. The hospital box. The baby-sized knitted cap, now gray, the ultrasound pictures in their envelope, the discharge paperwork, and the bracelet. Small hospital bracelet they put on the baby, that label they printed. I sat on the closet floor in the dark with my phone as a flashlight and went through all of it looking for, I don't know what, proof, that this was impossible, that no way we'd been there the whole time. And here's the thing I found. The other was a rich vein of evidence that I had given birth to a small human. The ultrasounds, the records of my labor, my own wristband. All of those papers in that box were evidence, and it was irrefutable evidence that I had been pregnant and birthed that baby at that hospital on that night. Not a single one of them proved anything about which baby came home. But then I saw the bracelet. They had a number on the bracelet for her tiny wrist when Emma was born. A long one. A number, a record number. The kind hospitals use to correlate a mother with a chart and baby. And as I sat there holding it, a small, bad thought came to me. I have not one time in 18 years checked whether this number matched anything. Of course I hadn't. Why would I? You had data until October 2023. You don't audit your own baby. Yet there it was, a series of numbers meant to be a chain, a bond, this baby is the child of this mother. And I did not know one way or another if that chain had ever really held. The second test returned the next morning. I am not going to leave you hanging like I hung. It said the same thing. 0%. Witnessed, notarized, courtroom grade 0%. No contamination, no lab error, no straw mix-up. The truth, twice, in writing. And that was the end of hoping, and the start of a question that would consume my life. And if Emma was not mine, and the truth I had carried said she took a baby home from that hospital, one that belonged to me, then there must be a girl somewhere, 18 years old now, whom I had never met, calling another woman Mom. And the sole thread I had to locate her on was a numbers number, embroidered on an alarmingly chipped plastic bracelet, from a hospital that, as I would soon come to find out, wanted nothing at all to do with me. Stay with me. But because when I made that call to get that number from the hospital, there was a quiet on the other end of the line too long for it to be anything other than my telling the woman at the hospital her number, and her immediate silence. Then what she said next was one of those first jolts in one's gut that told me maybe this wasn't an accident. I told Mark on a Thursday. I was sitting on that closet floor, and I knew it was time for him to know the truth before I started digging into the ground under our whole life, even if all he could afford to pay me this month was a little bit of my dignity. And I finally waited until Emma was at a friend's for the night and sat my husband down at the kitchen table and put both test results in front of him, and watched a man who I have loved half my life read himself to the bottom of that page. I had prepared myself for multiple reactions: anger, denial, the claim that I had gone crazy, which, by the way, would have been perfectly sensible to suspect of a wife who had clandestinely DNA tested their kid off a straw from a smoothie. What occurred, which I had not prepared for, was that he read it, and then reread it, and then placed the paper down very carefully, like if you pressed too hard the whole thing would break, and said to me, "But I was there." And then his face kind of dropped. Not crumpled, fell. As though there was something back of it that gave way. He had never denied it, which is why I came with my reply. "I was there," he said again, this time at a lower volume, and I knew he wasn't disagreeing. He was trying to argue with the universe. He was saying exactly what I had told my cold coffee a week back. I was there. I counted her fingers. How can this be? That man that I spent the last week suspecting laid his head down on our kitchen table and cried with a depth I've witnessed of him before, when he lost his father, but no other time. And I got up from my seat at the table and went to him, comforted him, and we sat like it for a long time. And somewhere in there, I quit being alone with it. That's the only good thing I can find to say about that Thursday. And from that point, there were two. And he had only one question when he was able to talk again, the same one I had. "Then where is she?" he said. "We had a baby, and what if Emma is not? Where's our baby?" "I don't know," I said, "but I'm going to find out." The hospital waited to be discovered. So I have to be cautious here, and never mind giving you the name of the hospital, I'm not telling you the town either, for reasons that will soon become clear. But I can tell you how it went, because it went like many of these things. Built a wall, polite as possible, brick by polite brick. Not so much people showing malice as showing self-defense. The first call, I gave the record number from the bracelet and received silence from the woman in medical records. That little quiet. Then she said, in a careful tone, the records from that long ago were archived, and they couldn't just give you information like that over the phone, and there were privacy considerations. And all of which is true, and all of which is fair, and all of which I would have likely agreed with from another person that hadn't gone silent first. But she'd gone quiet first, and once someone utters that they are silent, you cannot unhear it. I also obtained my own records in writing. That's allowed. They're mine. 3 weeks and 2 more phone calls and a form that had to be notarized, what finally came back, pages blackbarred like a government document. However, hospitals, it turns out, are not nearly as careful as they believe. Because buried in among the redactions, in the labor and delivery summary from the night they gave birth to Emma, was information they hadn't thought to black out. Times. A note. The word census. The maternity unit had been at near to full capacity that night. I recalled there'd been a heat wave. I even remembered it. Remembered being 9 months pregnant in August, feeling like I was baking from the inside out. And apparently heat waves do something to delivery wards. The records later told me they spike rather dramatically. The report noted that there had been a high census, many deliveries in a short time frame, short-staffed, and perhaps the most private line, as if an afterthought, that made me freeze. A note of a short-term power failure overnight and generator switchover, right during the window when I had been recovering. 2 baby girls, born 38 minutes apart. At the now familiar hospital to which this baby was brought, in an overcrowded, unstaffed, momentarily dark maternity ward on the hottest night of the melt year, at a time when that hospital, I checked that later, was still operating with paper tags and handwritten bracelets, before there were barcode systems or double-scan protocols for newborns like those mandated today so that this can't happen. And I finally sat at my kitchen table with those pages and made sense to where. Not who, not yet, but how. 2 bracelets on the wrong 2 babies. It was dark, it was chaos, it was hot. There were 2 newborn girls 38 minutes apart and a system held together with writing and goodwill. And nobody caught it. And 2 families left that day, and one of those was my family, and no one knew for 18 years. Or, and this is the thread that the quiet woman in a deep, Marshallese-languaged voice had loosened and pulled out without trying to, almost no one. So I am going to pause here and ask you something, because we are now at the very same fork I was, and as hell, I'd really like to know, what would you do? Now, I had enough to match up with the other family, the higher census in the birth times, and with a bit of public birth month in that county from that date, for 18 years ago, they tended to run them in the paper on a local basis, with names. Simple because those archives can be found online now if you know how. I could find them. Emma and another girl, a senior like her. Same graduating class, somewhere. I could find her name. I could find her face. And I sat there, hand on my mouse, and thought, am I entitled? Because understanding what finding them means, it means going up to total strangers and blowing their lives apart. It means informing another mother that her 18-year-old child sleeping down the hall is not actually hers, which means 2 girls, 2 full human beings with friends and plans and a pretty solid sense of exactly who they are, discovering that their entire creation is just an accident. Maybe they're happy. Perhaps they ought to be. Perhaps the most loving action I could take was to shut my laptop, set fire to the tests, and love Emma until the end of my days without ever asking anyone else to bear this. So honestly, comment below. Would you have looked? Or would you have left it alone? I'm not asking rhetorically. I switched my own mind about 4 times that night. I want to hear where you fall because there is no black and white here, only the gray that feels right with a sound mind. I looked. I managed to find some birth announcements from that month. I traversed the data to find 2 baby girls born at that hospital in the right period. One of them was Emma. The other had a name I didn't recognize, and the family I never knew existed in a town 3 states over, because they'd relocated shortly thereafter, which is its own small tragedy. This geography of how close we lived to colliding options in an aisle somewhere years before and failed. I found the family's name. Eventually, I turned up a public photo. A family, all smiley at some graduation season thing. A mother, a father, and a girl, 18, standing between them. And I want you to know what it means to open a stranger's family album and see your husband's face staring back at you from inside of a girl you've never met. Her eyes. Mark's eyes, that exact shade of brown, that exact configuration of features. The same eyebrows I see when he thinks something is funny but won't say it out loud. My mother-in-law's chin. A nose that had been staring up at me across a dinner table for 22 years. That was the end of any wondering. Any theory was no longer staring me in the face. I was looking at my daughter, the one I never got to raise. And in a house 3 states away was a woman I had never met, raising my child. I had 11 days to send the message. I wrote it probably 40 times. Every version was wrong. If you come on too strong, you're a crazy politician bombing their inbox with unsolicited messages. Too soft, and you must be hiding the thing that needs to tumble out of your mouth. How do you paraphrase the sentence, "I think our daughters were switched at birth," to write it to a woman who probably wonders what they are even talking about? How do you sign it? Sincerely? Warmly? There is no card for this. In the end, I kept it short. I explained who I was, that both our daughters had been born at the same hospital on the same night, and that I had information I thought she would want. A serious personal matter, not some sales pitch or scam. 100% clear that she never, ever wished to hear from me again if it came down to it, but hoping with every fiber of my being she'd pick up the phone. I left my number. I read it one more time. There was Emma asleep in the next hall. There was Markside Girl asleep down a hall 3 states away. And I clicked send before writing it for the 41st time. She called the next morning, and the first thing I noticed was her voice, because her voice was steady the way mine had been steady that morning making lunch. The steadiness of a woman carrying something very heavy and not letting it drop in front of anyone. We'll call her Diane. That's not her name. None of the names from here on out are real, and you'll see why. I received your message, and then, before I even had time to start my speech that I have rewritten 40 times, she said the thing that told me everything. She said, very quietly, "It's the eyes, isn't it?" I couldn't speak. As we chatted, I said, "I have spent 18 years explaining my daughter eyes. You know, her eyes are light, and Greg and I were both brown. My whole family is brown. Every single doctor's office, either at the hospital when she was born, or at some family party, people be like, 'Who does this child belong to?' And I always said the same thing that everybody says. Recessive genes, they skip around. And I believed it. I made myself believe it." A long breath. And then I saw your text, and the first thing that I thought of, even before reading it through to the end, is the eyes. 2 women, 3 states apart, and 18 years of the exact same noise in the night, and 18 years of choosing to stay in bed all the same. Not a stranger in my life has ever made me feel so seen. We talked for 2 hours. We compared the natal, the heat wave, the crammed ward, and the clock. We wrote out what we remember, which is close to nothing because you don't remember that much of the logistics of a night like that, but rather how it made us feel. For a long time, we didn't say the words test or prove, because we were both circling the thing making that swab real is a language neither of us could bring ourselves to use. But by the end of that call, we both realized there was no scenario in which we didn't dig into this. So we agreed to test, both girls, properly. Come on, I am not going to put you through that whole waiting torture again. You know that wait now. We did it twice together already. The results came in just as we both knew they would. Diane's daughter, the girl who had Mark's eyes, was biologically Mark's and mine. And Emma, our Emma, the girl I had raised, gave her lunch crusts off until 4th grade and wants to be a nurse, and texts the new kid so they won't have to eat alone, was Diane and Greg's, biologically speaking. The bracelets had been wrong. The babies had been swapped. 18 years later, 4 parents knew it for certain. Still, the girls had no idea. 3 weeks after that, we met up in person. A diner, on a highway, pretty much equidistant between our 2 towns. Because where else would you do this? There's no protocol. You choose a midpoint between 2 lives, and you meet at a Denny's-type place and order coffee no one drinks. Mark and I drove 4 hours. We hardly talked the entire way. I recall him reaching over at one point, placing his hand over mine on the console, not saying anything, me not saying anything, and that was the most either of us could handle. When we walked in, they were already in the booth, and I want to talk about the moment because it's the moment that crosses my mind most about all of this, more than the 0%, more than anything. I spotted Diane first. I knew her from the picture, and we did that thing, that horrible little nod. Two women across a diner acknowledging to each other that they are about to sit down and rest on cardboard pizza with the very core of the earth. And then I saw Greg. Then I saw the girl sitting next to Greg, their daughter. Its biological sister, no, my one child who had lived. I don't stop tripping on it even now. The daughter I had birthed. My daughter. 18 years old. Looking at the menu. And she stared up at me because I could tell her mother had stopped moving, and she stared straight into my own eyes, Mark's same eyes, and she didn't know who I was. She assumed we were friends of her parents, giving me a half-hearted, placating teenage smile, the type of smile Emma gives to people she doesn't really like. She sent her attention back to her menu. And over that sound, Mark made a noise I had never heard come out of him. Just once. Quiet. And I could feel him gripping the back of the booth. We didn't tell the girl on that day. It was the wrong place to be given that news, for one. You do not tell a child in a diner. But later, very carefully and only with all four parents and our agreed-upon counselor. It was four parents across a Formica table sipping awful coffee and looking at one another's children who looked like them, and asking the hardest question in existence. What do we do now? And so here's the thing no one tells you about a switched at birth story, especially the ones that make it to headlines. There is no swapping back. These are not babies you will toss across the table. They are 18 years old. They are whole people. Mine, Emma, 18 years of every day is mine to have, and biology does not undo a single second. And the girl with Mark's eyes is Diane's, in precisely that way, 18 years deep. No one at that table sought to unmake it. The only addition we wanted to make was the truth. But how? We talked for 4 hours. We learned virtually nothing in exchange, the one thing that mattered. And only because everyone was agreed. No one loses a daughter. Whatever this turned into, it had to be a story in which each of these girls comes through, and none of them loses. Then, at the end of this surreal afternoon, as we were paying visiting hours come to a close, unreal, finally getting ready to walk out the door, I see an older woman coming in to join Diane's family. Diane's mother, the grandmother. We'll call her Ruth. She'd have driven her own car alone, coming to meet them for the long drive back. So then Ruth comes over to our table, stares, like serious stare, and the blood drains out of her face. Not surprise. Not by the natural shock of seeing the woman who had her vacant womb tangled up in a maternal death swap with her granddaughter. Something else. Something older. She looked at me as if she already knew who I was. And the funny part, I would find out, in the most awkward conversation of this entire story, she had. Stay with me. That is because the change was by accident. But the part that almost broke me, and what finally set me free, was the one that Ruth knew, and one other person had known in silence for 18 years. I have labored over how to share the next part with you, because this is where what happened stops being a story about a hospital error and becomes a story about people. And people are harder. I will start with the kind one. There was a nurse. Young now, 18 years back, she had just started on the job a few months before, working the busiest night of the year in a packed ward under cover of darkness. I will never say her name because it doesn't matter. Yet days after that evening, poring over the paper charts in daylight with the machine humming and the heat at last working, she came across an inconsistency. Out of 2 charts, 2 numbers were conflicting with respect to longevity per bracelet. Print on paper and a handmade tag which had gone through multiple runs. Only she noticed, the only careful one, or the only new one still with enough faith in paperwork for it to have mattered. And she was 23 and scared, and she approached someone higher up, And that higher up, I'll never know exactly who, the hospital made damn sure of that, told her she was wrong. Told her the families had returned home, that the babies were okay, that reopening it would constitute a lawsuit, an investigation, and question careers, that she would be the one who burnt it all to the ground over some clerical thing that she was probably misreading. And she was 23, and she let herself be talked out of what she'd seen, the way I'd been talked out of the eyes, the way Diane said we all go and get talked out of this thing that we already know. It lasted 18 years in her possession. And the only reason I know any of this is that she came forward when all the hospital could do was finally admit it had been cornered by 2 notarized DNA tests, 4 very calm parents, and a lawyer we'd quietly retained. She was in her 40s now. She'd held on to it the entire time. Finally, she told the truth, and cried doing it. And she said that every damned year for 18 years, on the worst night in all of the years, she had thought about those 2 babies. I don't hate her. I just want to be clear on that front. When she was 12, a scared kid who tried and got crucified for it, she was the only one in that building. 2 of those babies were failed by the system. Except that she was the only one who ever even knew, and the institution made damn sure her knowing led nowhere. That's the kind one. Now the hard one. Diane's mom, Ruth, the grandmother who almost turned white at our table, wanted me to talk with her alone. A few weeks later, an elderly lady, 3 states from her home, coming to a coffee shop near me, on an old woman making the long drive away just so she could tell me something she'd waited 18 years to say. I should have realized from the toil of it that this was going to be terrible. She was at the hospital that night. That's how it started. Doing what mothers do, helping Diane. And this, in the chaos, the heat, the dark, the crowded ward, Ruth had seen something. The trauma of a nurse, panic-stricken with 2 babies fumbling over little bracelets, redoing the tag, looking to see if she had been seen. And in that moment, Ruth felt something, just a feeling. The same night noise we all got, except Ruth had hers delivered in the moment, live action and on site, and she said nothing. She made herself believe that she was exhausted and imagining things that night. Then they all go home, and the baby is perfectly fine, and Diane is ecstatic. And what was Ruth supposed to do? Walk into that joy-filled house and say, "I believe you were given the wrong baby?" On a feeling? With no proof? She told herself she'd watch. And she watched. And as the years piled up and blue eyes showed on a child 2 brown-eyed parents had no business having, and the comments began, Ruth's feeling grew into something that she couldn't call imagination any longer. But then there was a 4-year-old. A 7-year-old, one, a 10-year-old that Diane would have died for. It made it more and more impossible to say, because the truth got less affordable every year that went by, and the silence became more and cheaper, until eventually the girl grew up, and it was far too late to talk about it anyway. Ruth could barely remember when it had even been possible. She knew. On some level, she had known it for 18 years. And she said nothing. To protect her daughter, in defense of a happiness she couldn't bear to set off. And to protect it, she allowed 2 families to live a whole lie, and allowed a stranger, me, to raise, and my own child grow up in another state, 3 states away, while she, alone, bore that burden into old age. She delivered all of that not in an office, but a coffee shop. And at the end of it, she said, "I am not asking you to forgive me. I just couldn't die without you knowing it wasn't all a mistake. Somebody saw. Somebody could have stopped it. That somebody was me. And I didn't." I had wanted to tell you I was gracious. Honestly, I was trembling as I sat there. 18 years. 18 Christmases and birthdays and first days of school I could have spent with the daughter I gave birth to. That we all would have spent, truthfully, even messily, even hard, lost because a scared woman decided it was easier to keep her mouth shut. I was so furious I could not talk, and then I looked at her. This was some old lady who had driven all the way from 3 states away to confess a thing that made her look like a total monster, when she could easily have carried it to the grave and let me think it was absolutely no one at fault. And I found out something I didn't want to find out. I understood her completely. Because I had been her. For just a school project afternoon and the 18 years of playing along before it, I had been her to a T, a person who suspected but denied, because denial was everything looked away at great human cost. The only thing separating Ruth from me was that I reached a swab 18 years too late, and she never made it at all. She'd been carrying my precise cowardice, but hers had had 18 more years of hardening to settle in, and a granddaughter's entire happiness resting on top of it. On that day, I did not forgive her. I want to be honest. It arrived in separate drips and came primarily on account of how the girls acted without me, which I will come to because it is the bit that ultimately saved us all. Though I did say one thing to her before she left for that long, sad drive home. I said, "You could have spoken. You were wrong not to." She nodded because she already knew. Then I realized, but I'm not going to use the remaining time I have tearing myself apart with the anger as you did to your little secret. It is not at the end of all its bones, and I am not going to unveil one in the dark for 18 years. Maybe, and I think it was the first time I really started to let go of it. Not because she earned it, because I could not afford the alternative. For 18 years you carry a thing that it would be best for you to set down, and I saw what that looked like sitting across from me. I spoke in the way of baby talk because I did not want to turn into her. Of course, that was 6 weeks before the girls met. That's the part everyone got really interested in, which I can hardly explain without using your time and me stopping, so forgive me if I keep it brief. 4 parents, one of them a family counselor from 3,000 miles away in Phoenix, an hour-and-a-half-long, tortuous preparation. 2 18-year-old girls sat at the same table with parents who conceived her, and more difficult, 2:06 a.m., October 2nd, 2010. I was prepared for tears, for anger, for a girl who would feel cheated out of something. And there were tears. Yet here is what 18-year-olds understand that the rest of us, with all our years of seasoned fear, had lost the ability to comprehend, which they grasped immediately and without all of the torment we bathed in. Emma, my Emma, giggled at the sight of Diane and Greg, her parents by birth, and she trembled a bit and shed some tears. Then she turned to me from across the room, walked right over to stand next to me like she's always done since childhood, stood there close in where there's always been trust, and said to them, kindly as hell but firm in her conviction, "Good to meet you. I really mean that. I want to know you." And with her hand finding mine, "But I hope it's okay if I've got a mom already." And so Mark's daughter, my biological daughter, did the exact opposite. She came to us, she cried, she wanted to learn about us, and from that point on has known us ever since. Then she stepped in beside Diane, the only mom she's ever known, and made that just as obvious. In an afternoon, 2 girls in one room did what 4 terrified adults and 1 hospital and 1 frightened nurse and 1 silent grandmother had been incapable of doing for 18 years. And at the same time that they told the truth, they chose love, and they absolutely refused, flatly refused, to let anyone seek an enemy between the truth and the love. They asked me if I saw my actual child return, as if someone flipped a switch that day back in October 2023. I always say the same thing. I never lost her. I just newly met her entirely. So let me just tell you where we all landed, because I know that's what you're waiting for. And also because I think you need to hear it can land somewhere good. We didn't swap anyone. A swap was never on the cards. It couldn't be. But then something stranger and, I now earnestly believe, better came along. We merged. It began awkward and a little small. One holiday nobody had any etiquette for. Two families squeezed in around one table, too many heads probing where not enough chairs. And it was awkward and kind of beautiful, and we did it again and again. Then there are the birthdays containing two fathers and two mothers, and in some cases the kids have 4 grandparents, a chat group that is simply insane. It's really just amazing how Emma has gained an entire family, a mother in Diane who loves her dearly, a father, grandparents, and not lost anything at all of the family she was raised by. And I gained a daughter. On Sundays, I received a call from the girl who has Mark's eyes. Last summer, she came to stay with us for a couple of weeks. She isn't my stand-in for Emma, and Emma isn't my consolation prize for her. Love doesn't work like that. It's not a pie that you have to cut into even slices. It just grew. It's greater than it ever has been, in more ways and over more miles than any of us would have chosen, and now none of us would take it back. Even Ruth. Even her. The girls were right, and I knew they were right, and the forgiveness that was impossible for me to conjure at a coffee shop came in the slow quiet of watching an old woman fold both of her granddaughters, the one by blood and the one by 18 years of love, into her arms across that table, crying with a relief that seemed like it had been waiting a lifetime to be. She was able to put it down before she passed away. The girls let her. I let her. That is what you do when you stop feeding the anger in stilled quarters. I began this entire saga with a number on a monitor, 0%. And I want to conclude by sharing with you what that number actually means, because I misunderstood it for a long while. Reading that 0% had me thinking it was saying Emma wasn't my daughter. It wasn't. It couldn't. That kind of test will tell you exactly one thing only: where in the body came from. It can't tell you anything at all about to whom that person belongs. It doesn't know anything of 3 a.m. feedings, or braids learned off YouTube, or tonsils, or lunches with the crusts cut off. It has no way of knowing who came, day after day, for 18 years. DNA doesn't lie. I learnt the hard way and built a whole new life around that. And here is where it gets complicated. The other half that took my swapped daughter and grandmother guilt and 2 heroic teenagers to understand. The DNA does not lie, but it also has no love. It allows you to know where the person is from. It could never tell who decided to stay. Emma is mine. Not despite the 0%, completely separately from it. The test was accurate, and it changed nothing about the only thing that has ever actually been true, and that is, I am her mother. Because I have been her mother every single moment of her life, and I will be until I snuff this earth myself. A lab 3 states over does not get a vote. So now I want to speak to specifically one person in this video. You know who you are. Several years later, you hear a noise in your house at night, a question that you've been getting out of the bed for. Maybe it is nothing like mine. Maybe it is entirely different than what we have and a different secret. A secret door you have walked past for years now that you are scared of the other side. I was the most loving coward I know for 18 years, and I want you to hear this from someone who finally got curious. The truth didn't kill me. The lie that was quietly killing me all along. It was the truth that finally did it for me and allowed me to breathe. It cost me. This was the most difficult year of my life, and I would not sell that back for the comfortable dark. Not for anything. Look at the thing. Whatever your thing is, you are louder than the silence. You were always going to survive the truth. It was the uncertainty that was devouring you. For those of you who this story reached, to you sitting at your computer or phone with your own quiet question in your mind, I would ask that you do 2 small things. So subscribe to keep these stories in your orbit, because I promise you the only thing scarier than all those unshakable feelings is that someone who reads this has lived through your very version of this, and you are a lot less alone than how lonely silence wants you to feel. And then write in the comments below. Tell me your age and say one thing this made you want to say to someone you love before it is too late. Just one. But today you don't need to say it to them. But write it here, where it's honest, where you cannot shove it back in the darkness. I read them. All of them. And next week, we kick off a story that starts with a will reading, an impossible-to-open door, and a daughter no one in the family knew was there, and just one envelope that turned a funeral into this family's loudest day ever. This one, you aren't going to want to miss. So glad you stayed on with me. Take care of yourself, and go look at the thing.